Normalmente empiezo todos estos actos que organizamos en el Centro de Gobierno Corporativo diciendo soy Mario Lara, pero es que veo tanto antiguo alumno que la verdad que yo creo que es redundante que me presente porque todos me conocéis. La verdad que es un placer volver a convocaros y volver a veros en Esade Madrid en este nuevo ciclo de geopolítica y consejos de administración que el Centro de Gobierno Corporativo, conjuntamente con EsadeGeo, desarrolla ya por tercer año consecutivo en nuestro campus de Madrid. Yo no voy a, creo que es más interesante escuchar todo lo que viene detrás, pero quiero agradecer no solamente a nuestros colegas de EsadeGeo que colaboran en esta iniciativa, en particular quiero agradecer a Emma Fernández, que es el tercer año que nos ayuda a coordinar este ciclo y hacer que las cosas puedan ocurrir. Así que mil gracias, Emma, nuevamente por acompañarnos. Y en los agradecimientos, aparte a todos vosotros, también agradecer a quienes apoyan la actividad que desarrolla el Centro de Gobierno Corporativo desde hace más de 5 años, que son nuestros sponsors PwC, Georgeson, IBM, Mercer, Diligent y la Asociación de Antiguos Alumnos, iniciativa en la que desde el minuto 1 nos acompañó. De hecho, ya todos los agradecimientos a nuestros ponentes. Thank you, Damian, for joining this initiative today. We're willing to hear your views, your insights about the economic security. In a moment, I hope that Judith Arnal is coming. It's in a traffic jam. I have moved to English, but the discussions are going to happen in English too. But coming back to Spanish for all of you in just 2 minutes. Judith Arnal está llegando y se unirá también al debate. Agradecerles a los ponentes que nos acompañen hoy y nada, recordad que Esade, desde que iniciamos nuestras iniciativas, nuestros programas en el ámbito del gobierno corporativo, siempre pensamos, y esto lo hicimos con el bueno de Ángel que nos acompaña, Ángel Saz, el director de EsadeGeo, que desde el Consejo de Administración teníamos que tener un buen entendimiento de cómo nos impacta en nuestra industria, en nuestra cadena de valor, las dinámicas geopolíticas. Desde el minuto 1 en nuestros programas académicos lo introdujimos, en nuestros programas de gobierno corporativo, y en estos años hemos ido trabajando con EsadeGeo, tratar un poco de conceptualizar cómo aproximarnos desde el Consejo de Administración a la emergencia un poco de los riesgos geopolíticos. Y si habéis seguido un poco las publicaciones que hemos hecho en este ámbito, pues recordaréis hace ya casi 3 años un artículo de Juan Moscoso, que está aquí con nosotros, donde nos proponía que por un lado teníamos que, como consejeros, hacer un seguimiento de las tendencias que desde el punto de vista geopolítico nos podían impactar. En una segunda propuesta en ese framework que nos sugería Juan y EsadeGeo, debíamos de promover la colaboración público-privada porque en este ámbito es especialmente crítico, clave, y en tercer lugar integrarlo adecuadamente en nuestros modelos de gestión de riesgos, que son clave también, obviamente, para la definición de nuestro marco estratégico como compañías, ¿no? Esa es un poco la propuesta que desde Esade os hacemos a los consejeros y, de alguna manera, esta iniciativa pues trata un poco de contribuir a ese primer punto, ¿no? de identificar tendencias para después promover su integración en nuestros modelos de riesgos y desarrollar modelos de colaboración con las instituciones públicas que nos puedan ayudar a minimizar y a integrar adecuadamente esos riesgos en nuestra gestión. Yo no voy a decir más, voy a dejar la palabra a Emma Fernández para que nos introduzca un poco la propuesta que en este curso académico 25-26 os proponemos y que tengáis un poco visibilidad de las 3 encuentros que vamos a celebrar aquí en Esade Madrid.
Bueno, gracias Mario por la introducción, bienvenidos a todos y para mí es una satisfacción pues tener la oportunidad de coordinar este ciclo pues con Juan, con Ángel y con Mario. Este ciclo, como sabéis, nació hace 3 años y la realidad es que nació porque Mario y yo estábamos debatiendo cómo presentar o profundizar más en los riesgos tecnológicos para el Consejo de Administración. Y en ese debate, un poco la conclusión a la que llegamos es que la tecnología se estaba viendo cada vez más afectada por la geopolítica y junto con Juan y con Ángel diseñamos el ciclo inicial con 3 ejes, el de la seguridad porque estábamos iniciando la guerra de Ucrania, el de las cadenas de suministro porque era de alguna manera el final de la era de la globalización y por último la tecnología que nos parecía que era un ámbito que estaba cada vez más ligado a esa guerra tecnológica entre China y Estados Unidos. Cada año revisitamos la razón y si existen razones para continuar con el ciclo. Y cuando nos sentamos los 4 a ver si tiene sentido volver a sentarnos aquí con vosotros, la realidad es que cada año suceden cosas que justifican todavía más que continuemos con este debate. Creemos además que el nivel de aceptación tanto de las propias ponencias, aunque últimamente con el tráfico en Madrid se está poniendo más difícil lo presencial, pero la realidad, la aceptación de todos los materiales que tiene el ciclo está siendo una muy buena acogida por parte de todos los consejeros y lo que ha sucedido en el último año pues hace que estemos hoy aquí de nuevo iniciando este tercer ciclo con la primera conferencia que tiene que ver con la seguridad. Y ya no estamos hablando de seguridad desde el punto de vista de los conflictos, estamos hablando de seguridad económica. Y en la seguridad económica tenemos una serie de factores, por supuesto la defensa, con todas las inversiones que Europa está haciendo y que está abriendo muchas oportunidades a distintos sectores de alta tecnología, pero también la seguridad en términos, por ejemplo, de seguridad como consecuencia de los eventos climáticos, que estamos viviendo cada vez con un impacto mayor en la economía. No sé si habéis visto unas cifras que han puesto de manifiesto que en Europa la economía que más se ha visto afectada durante este último año por razones climáticas ha sido la española, que ha tenido de alguna manera unos extracostes muy importantes por esta materia. Pues no voy a avanzar más porque Juan y Damián nos van a introducir en este tema. Las cadenas de suministro que llevará Ángel en el mes de febrero, este ha sido el año del comercio, o sea, desde la llegada de Trump a la Casa Blanca no hemos hablado de otra cosa en las portadas de los periódicos que no sea comercio. Y las consecuencias precisamente del comercio para las compañías han abierto una polémica de cómo gestionar los aprovisionamientos y sobre todo cómo gestionar las localizaciones de nuestras fábricas, de nuestros centros productivos. Comentábamos esta mañana una noticia sobre Canadá y él hablaba Demian de las negociaciones de Xi Jinping con Canadá, porque la industria del automóvil canadiense está teniendo una problemática tremenda para responder precisamente a esta situación. Y por último, en tecnología, este año tenemos una discusión importante. La tecnología está afectando a la soberanía. China dicen que está ya a solo 6 meses de distancia en inteligencia artificial de alcanzar a la tecnología americana, que hace nada nos parecía una distancia enorme, y lo peor es la distancia que el resto de las regiones y Europa en concreto tienen en ese tema. Entonces estamos viéndonos afectados por el ámbito de la innovación. La innovación disruptiva tiene un impacto enorme en las compañías europeas y en los consejos de la administración tenemos que debatir cada vez más el impacto de todas estas tendencias en las decisiones y como Mario nos ha señalado, queremos abundar en el marco de discusión de los consejos de administración sobre estos temas. Entonces yo no voy a alargarme más porque lo importante es lo que nos tienen que contar los ponentes hoy y lo que nos van a contar a lo largo del ciclo. De nuevo, muchas gracias por estar aquí y gracias a Mario y a Esade por darme esta oportunidad.
Pues muchísimas gracias, Emma, y yo creo que es turno de Juan Moscoso y Damián Levy, que nos van a acompañar en esta primera parte de la jornada. Gracias.
Bueno, buenos días a todos y a todas. Y now we are going to turn into English full time until the end. I want you to introduce our first speaker, which is Damien. He's a special advisor to the European Commission in economic security matters. He's a lawyer, and he has
an economist,
and he has a long career in both fields at the European Commission, where he moved after a long career in law firms in Europe and in the US. Damien is going to present his ideas for 15 minutes, more or less, no? 15,
a bit more, maybe.
A bit more.
There's
and
a lot
after
to
that,
talk about.
With Judith Arnal, that you also know her, we will hold a dialogue and a discussion, and also with all of you from the public. We're a little bit behind in time, so I think the best thing. I mean, Elma and Mario have introduced the cycle. This is the third year we're doing.
I understand Spanish.
Always
and he speaks very slowly, which is
very nice. He speaks very slowly, not
lentamente.
We've organized this cycle for the last 2 years among three main pillars: economic security, chain value, and technology, from different angles. We've had also here, we have security people, intelligence officials, generals, people from companies which are more in that field, and this year you and Judith will give us a very good perspective, I think. So thanks for coming. Thanks for traveling all the way from Brussels, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. Thanks to Angel for having invited me here. I think it's super important that the people working in Brussels, in European Union institutions, go out of the Brussels bubble, out of Belgium, and speak to people in companies, in think tanks, in academia, and government. Because this is equally important. So the views I will present today are my own personal views. So don't quote me as commission official, but you will see they are fairly aligned to what we are doing. So I thought I would briefly say a few words on, are we actually facing a new world economic order? Present you three geoeconomic challenges briefly, and I think what's interesting, I mean, you've heard about them already this morning from Emma, but is how we look at them. What's our strategy to deal with those challenges? And then a quick recap for a few takeaways for you. So are we actually facing a new world economic order? The answer is yes, totally, and it's actually, from our perspective, changing fast. It's a very interesting speech of our president in Berlin about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. It's really interesting to read, actually. And her message is also that the EU institutions and governments are not adapting fast enough to this. So 3 geopolitical challenges with 3 flags: Russia, China, and the United States, which present very distinct challenges. I've personally worked a lot in the last 3 years on sanctions against Russia, as I was explaining this morning, where we have developed a lot of sanctions packages, China and the US. So Russia, I think Russia's war in Ukraine is an existential threat for the European Union. It's the first major war, intense conflict on the European continent, 500,000 injured or dead, 500,000. We are faced with a very autocratic model, heavy consequences for the unions. For the European Union, we have hosted between 4 and 6 million refugees. The impact on energy prices. Russia used to be our 5th trading partner. When we discussed with the Americans at the start of the war in February 2022 about sanctions, US exports to Russia, 5 billion. EU exports, 90 billion. And so when we were saying, well, we're going to cut our own exports of this and that project, the pain to us was significantly larger than to the US. The US was not significant at all. And on the import side, of course, we were very dependent on Russian energy. And in a way, it's the illustration of failed strategy. I've been a trade negotiator. I negotiated, for example, the TTIP with the United States, and have been involved in other trade agreements. And I think one of our key elements of our strategy was to see if we have stronger interdependence between economies, we reduce the risk of war. And I think with Russia, that strategy has not worked at all. China, a few words. You will probably recall the statement, "Friendship without limits," concluded 2 weeks before the start of the war in Ukraine. China is also, for us, a significant challenge because of its economy. The dual circulation strategy, whereby they are supporting a lot domestic industries, making them less and less dependent on the world. And on the other hand, they want to have the world being more and more dependent on them. And so building capacity with very significant subsidies, and then having predatory pricing. China is in the 30th consecutive month of industrial price deflation. So prices are going down. So the buyers are, of course, sitting out. Why should I buy this month? Is next month the supplier is going to sell at a lower price? I mean, deflation for more than 2 years, it's unthinkable for us, but this is actually happening. And then weaponization of dependencies, where the Chinese authorities do not hesitate a second to exercise controls, to impose new controls vis-à-vis the rest of the world. And I put the date of 2049. You probably know what this means. It's the 100 years of the creation of the Republic. And you know, a country I'm going to talk about has this MAGA, or at least the president has this MAGA motto. In a way, China doesn't have a very different motto, but it's a very long-term strategy where they want to come back to the place they were in the 17th century, basically. Just a few words, growing trade imbalance. Our exports to China have plateaued 3 years ago, but their exports have not. And so we see a growing imbalance. And if you look at values on the left, if you look at volume is on the right, it's even way worse when you look at volumes. Third challenge, there's no lack of challenges, right? Is of course the US, where the current administration is really redefining the entire set of relations they have with the rest of the world. And as we have seen, maximizing leverage in a bilateral context. We would, I think, be significantly stronger should we unite in our conversations with the US colleagues, but we don't. And so you see a shift, very fast shift between from rules to deals, where alliances are put into question, international institutions are put into question. The US is not at the COP. The US will not be at the G20, for example. The US is still in the WTO, but redefining its engagement. And we can say more about this, of course. So what's our response to these challenges? What do we do? Maybe a few words. I have a different job, and I think so you do as well. Because so we are doing two things in a way, defending the rules-based system that we've built since 1945, GATT, WTO, and bilateral treaties, a web of bilateral free trade agreements that Emma talked about. But then also trying to build, in a way, an EU power. And are we willing to do that? That's one of the questions, I think, which is very much open. Okay, so what do we do? We have 2 years ago adopted an economic security strategy, the first time that the Commission has done this. And it's, of course, you put in it a couple of things you've been doing. So you don't recycle, but you just present it in a different way. So it's a new conceptual framework, but it's also a huge chantier, a huge work program where we have defined this in promote, protect, and partner. So on the promote side, we have been developing way more sectoral initiatives than we have before. Industrial policy is à la mode. It's not at all a dirty word. When I started in the Commission in 2001, industrial policy. No, we don't do industrial policy. We have total trust and faith in markets. No, don't think about industrial policy yet. So now we are really shifting fast. CHIPS Act, so investing money and combining this with private money to make sure we still have the semiconductor industry. Net Zero Industrial Act is about the technologies that are necessary for the transition to a net zero economy. We will soon present a new proposal on resource raw materials, because we see obviously that others are monopolizing raw materials, the access to raw materials, and even more the processing of raw materials. Of course, ReArm 2030, the Commission has proposed that European Union plus the member states invest in 4 years 800 billion euros, which is huge, and is proposing a number of things to make this happen. Recently, also, the Commission proposed a stronger budget, come back to it, and simplify deregulation. We went too far in proposing regulations. We really need to make the life of our companies significantly easier. We can't afford keeping on adding and adding new rules. So you may have heard of Omnibus. It's not a train. In Belgium, an omnibus is a train that stops at every station. I don't know if it's the same in Spain. But an omnibus is basically a piece of legislation in which you put a number of provisions changing a number of other pieces of EU law, EU regulation. So the budget, but I don't have much time, but it's significantly bigger budget that we have proposed, with more focused on the economy. I think more flexibility. It's also getting a bit of pushback for the moment, because we are proposing to have more flexibility across cohesion, agriculture, and other things. I think we really need to look at, again, the value of each euro we will be spending at EU level to see whether it's really where we should put our money. That we'll have 2 years of discussions and negotiations on this. And then still on the promote side, our president has announced that we are shifting to a made in Europe strategy. Again, something that 25 years ago was unthinkable. And so that's part of the things that the Commission will be announcing soon, where we realize we need, for a number of sectors that are vital to our economy and our national security, in a way, we need to close our markets going forward. There's no other way around. Protect. So on the promote side, a lot of initiatives. On the protect side, what we put in protect is protect from technology leakage. My day job, in a way, is still FDI screening, so the control of foreign investment. Dual-use export controls, where we see is the go-to tool of the last 7 years, being used more and more. And at European level, we still have a very orthodox view of export control. We have a foreign subsidy regulation, which we used already 2 or 3 times in public tenders. For example, for railway stock in Bulgaria, where a Chinese company had won the bid, but then we used the foreign subsidy regulation, and the bidder, because the bid was way too subsidized, so withdrew. Research security is another very important area of work, where if you look at the European Union, what we still have is a lot of research, IP, and this is one of the areas where we still have high-end, leading scientists. The scientists and security, that doesn't go well together. Scientists love to work with scientists everywhere in the world. They love to collaborate with other scientists and share ideas, and this is how science progresses. And so we are working with research institutions, and ministries in charge of research, to really gradually raise awareness and make sure there are more restrictions, but we can't do science cooperation we were doing in this completely changing, fast-changing geopolitical environment. And then we have the anti-coercion instrument, which is in place, which we haven't used. It's kind of it's a very strong weapon. If the European Union is feel coerced, we can impose restrictions on many things. Public procurement, we can restrict exports, foreign investment, trade, but we haven't used it yet because we don't feel coerced in this geopolitical environment, I suppose. Partner. European Union is not alone in the world, and actually in this fast-changing world, we are seen as a very credible and reliable partner, and we are benefiting from tailwinds to conclude new free trade agreements. Now, the Mercosur, I can talk days about the Mercosur, which we resumed the negotiations of here in La Cumbre in Madrid in 2010, when I was there advising the Trade Commissioner. I think we concluded 5 years ago, but I think hopefully now we bring it to the finishing line and we will ratify and open the markets finally for our exports to Mercosur and vice versa. India, we are working towards a free trade agreement by the end of the year. Indonesia, UAE. It's a bit like doing the Trump 1 administration, where also we concluded the free trade agreement with Japan and Vietnam. Japan, certainly seeing the Trump 1 administration, said, I actually need a stronger relationship with the European Union and more predictability for the markets for my companies. So we actually see the same phenomenon for the moment. And then we need to partner with Japan, Canada, Switzerland, and others on economic security. And CRM is critical raw materials, find the raw materials where they are and negotiate agreements with the governments, help our companies have long-term supply agreements with the governments to have the raw materials that we need for industry. And then I put enlargement in this. We don't talk much about enlargement. Enlargement is about making the European Union bigger and more stable in a way. And on the scale of the global economy, having a bigger union, we think, is also is making the union stronger. So that's why it's in the partner. Our approach, so not much you've heard is new. I think the approach is, over the last 2 years, we've done risk assessment. So we are scanning in different areas of vulnerabilities and are developing mitigating measures. And some of the initiatives I've presented or will be coming in the coming months are also influenced by the risk assessments we have been doing. When we spot the vulnerabilities, we try to propose, as part of our promote initiatives, solutions to that as well. Are we progressing? Well, not fast enough. Our company is de-risking fast enough. I don't know if anyone in the room has been following a bit the Nexperia incident. So we have a Dutch company making chips in the UK, Germany, and a bit in the Netherlands. The wafers, then they are sent to China, where they do the finishing. They cut the big wafers into small chips. And they have 800 types of chips, low-value chips that go into cars, all kinds of cars, and a lot of other industrial products. The Chinese government, for 3 weeks, has prohibited the export of these chips, which are finished in China. And so that's why in the news you see articles about car manufacturers saying, maybe in a couple of weeks, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we will have to close down our plant because we don't get the chips that we bought. So are we de-risking enough? You would think, if you go back 2021 during the COVID crisis, we also saw plants of car manufacturers closed because they had cancelled orders for chips. And the chip makers were then making chips for other products. So you would have thought 4 years ago, they've had a problem, they had to close plants, so they would then diversify their supply sources, they would have double sourcing. They don't. So de-risking is, I think, a real challenge. Do we have a shared vision, analysis, urgency? Well, I think these are open questions, and we don't have yet at EU level an effective governance structure to be really a power-based. We have an effective structure to deal with what the European Union was meant to be, an internal market. But we don't have yet the governance to deal with today's challenges. And if you look at the fiscal capacity of the European Union, it's dwarfed by the budgets, of course, of China and the United States. So you also have a different job, but you know that, and we need to work together. I'm deeply convinced of that, and we are all, that companies and governments at European level, at national level, need to work much better together to assess the threat challenge, the threat horizon, and work on solutions. So to recap, we are faced with unprecedented challenges. We have a strategy which is thought through, and it's in work in progress. I think we very much recognize that. I think the European Union will remain open wherever possible, but closed where necessary, and all our jobs are changing. Thank you very much.
Well, that was closer than we expected. Shorter, sorry.
Well, you told me I had to be fast. So
yes. Now we're going to invite Judith also to to the stage. Oh, Judith. Thanks.
Thank you.
Judith Arnal, she's a board member of the Bank of Spain. She's also a resident analyst in the Elcano Institute, and she belongs to the civil service group of técnicos comerciales del Estado, public economists, for naming. Okay, so now our idea is to try to do a dialogue, so we can go a bit get into your presentation, which has been very, very good. Thank you for that. I will start begin with Judith, no? So, and if you want this first intervention, you can give you even 5 minutes. No? Okay.
Okay.
And thanks for coming. We know it's getting more and more complicated.
No, many thanks to you, Juan, to Esade for the invite. I'm so sorry I was late. I spent 90 minutes in my car in a traffic jam, but and congratulations for a brilliant presentation. If I may react to some of the points and also to exchange views, I have the feeling that we are now very much obsessed about geopolitics for the good reasons and why this is being included in board agendas. But I think that this trend started already a few decades ago. And I tend to see the accession of China to the World Trade Organization in 2001 as one of the first triggers that led to the adoption of aluminium tariffs by the US administration back in 2002. Also quotas against Chinese textile in 2006. And something that is, I think, less well known but still super relevant is that the Obama administration in 2016 was the first one not to reappoint a member of the appellate body of the World Trade Organization, which could seem to be a pretty technical issue, but it's not, as the appellate body of the World Trade Organization is the one in charge of the dispute settlement, dispute resolution in a World Trade Order. So this was already a first step in the direction of not being fully committed to the common principles of World Trade Order. Of course, we all know then what happened under Trump administration 1, all these trade war with China. And I would say that a second trigger to what's happening now is the Plan Made in China 2025, which was launched back in 2015 and which has granted China increasing dominance in technology, right? So now China, they dominate lithium batteries, electric vehicles, civil and military drones, high-speed trains. They're also fighting the battle when it comes to AI. So also under Biden administration, all the restrictions introduced under Trump 1 were kept, and they went even further. They started fighting this technological battle with Chinese administration with the introduction of export controls to the most advanced semiconductors. So I think that this is something pretty much shared by different US administrations, both Democrats and Republicans. The tone has been increasing. The degree of protectionism has been increasing. Of course, under Trump, too, everything is a complete disorder, a complete disaster. Also, in terms of rhetoric, this is very difficult to swallow. But I think that this has been in the making for already a few decades. I really don't envy you, European Commission. I mean, I know that you're not talking in your capacity as a Commission officer, but I don't envy you because, I mean, when it comes to trade policy, of course, this is an exclusive competence of the EU, but still you need to coordinate 27 member states. Luckily, this is not by unanimity, by qualified majority. Otherwise, it would be a complete nightmare. But when I think about industrial policy, all these initiatives that you have tabled, like the CHIPS Act, critical raw materials, I mean, there's not so much that can be done at EU level if member states do not cooperate, because this very much falls also with member states. So many times when I see that the blame is put on Brussels or the blame is put on the European Commission, I think that it's also important to convey to the general audience that many of these issues do not fall exclusively on the EU, but more on member states. And if member states don't want to do anything, it's very difficult to make progress. And a few, two more remarks, and I'll give the floor back to Juan. On the anti-coercion instrument, indeed, it's like, I'm not going to say atomic bomb, but I agree that it's a very powerful instrument. But first of all, after seeing what we've done with the US, with this pseudo-trade agreement, I don't want to call it a trade agreement, it's not. It's a political agreement. Do you think it's credible that we would activate it? And in case that we were to do so, isn't it too slow? Because I see all the requirements, all the studies that need to be run, all the consultations, and it would take a few months to activate it, at least the way I read it. And last but not least, on Nexperia, which indeed is a very interesting case regarding economic security. You said it's a Dutch company. It was a Dutch company up until 2019. In 2019, it became Chinese. I mean, the Chinese bought it. So this also flags to me how difficult your job is, because this was a national security decision made by the Dutch government, right? So there's not so much that can be done at the EU level. So we can really be at risk. Our automotive industry can be at risk of not having these not super advanced legacy chips, but just because of the decision or the non-decision of one government. And I think that what triggered this response by China was the intervention by the Dutch government in the board of Nexperia a few weeks ago, after they were fine with allowing this to become a Chinese company, legally Chinese company in 2019. So I leave it here.
I'm sure that Damien can react to Judith, no? This is a very easy table to...
I mean, you're raising super interesting points. Yes, of course, the competition between China and the United States has been going on for a long time. And I think it's, how they call it, I was a diplomat in Washington, so 2 years under Obama, 2 years under Trump. Historical moment. And so it's what they call a bipartisan issue, that both Democrats and Republicans think that China is not abiding by the global trade rules. And that's why, and that the appellate body, which is indeed, we had agreed in the WTO, the Uruguay round, that the trade disputes between economies would be settled by judges for the first time. And the US had agreed to that instead of, which is very unique. Usually the United States never agrees with, to delegate the resolution of disputes they have with other countries to a third party or an independent institution. And they were not happy with the successive decisions of the appellate body. And so that's why indeed they basically neutralized it. We came up with an alternative solution, as you know, the European Union. We've been building an alternative judicial body. And we are trying to convince other countries to join that. China actually joined. So we have functioning appellate body with the Chinese and a number of other countries. Japan also joined. But I think the intensity of the change and the speed of the change, and some people call it a tech war and an economic war. I don't use those terms, but in Washington, and so you can't do two wars at the same time, which in a way was what Biden was trying to do. Trump, we don't know. It's unclear.
He doesn't even know himself.
It's unclear. The China policy of the United States government is unclear. It's a mix of both things that seem contradictory. Nexperia, no, you're right, and I kind of purposely didn't mention that. I think it was taken over 2018, 2019. At the time, the semiconductor sector was not a strategic security sector for the Netherlands. Therefore, the decision was a non-decision, as you said. It was that their law was protecting telecom companies and a few others, but not semicon. And so, and I think back then, everybody said it's a great deal. It's a great deal. And by the way, the factory in China, which does the finishing of the chips, was built by Philips in the late 1990s. Great book to read, by the way, is Apple in China, that came out a few months ago, that also tells the same story of how Western tech companies moved production to China and actually helped. And the claim of the book is by Patrick McGee, is that Apple trained 27 million workers in China in the IT industry. So we have a formidable force against us. So, and last point, I totally agree with you. EU is not Brussels, Brussels is not EU, it's all of us. So it's super important. And I'm very glad to have been invited here. Yeah.
What about what Judith mentioned regarding the pseudo trade agreement between the EU and the US? I mean, how do you see it from an economic security perspective as a coercion instrument? As do you think it's going to? I mean, I fear this that it's not going to be accomplished. For example, in energy purchases. No, I mean, what can we expect in the next?
So it's an understanding. It's not a trade deal in the traditional sense of the word. The Commission concluded that understanding because it wanted to have a predictable trading environment between Europe and the United States. It's the first time that we agree that they raise their tariffs and we lower our tariffs. It's never happened. And part of the same understanding, we, based on conversations we had with companies, we have also put in the joint understanding that European Union actors intend to buy indeed energy products. And those conversations are ongoing, but separate from those are more private deals, basically. It was the best deal on the table that we could get. And that's why the choice was an impossible choice between you continue what you could call a trade war, like Canada is having, or China in a way, or you have a more predictable relationship where you change a number of things, and we are working towards implementing that. The deal was an oral deal. These deals are not laid down on paper the day they are agreed. He does things differently. Then last point on the anti-coercion instrument, I'm confident it will be used, and I'm confident we'll make it work. Our proposal for the instrument was different. We didn't want the Council of Ministers or the member states to have to decide that we are being coerced. The Council, in its political wisdom, said, no, that's a decision of foreign policy. We cannot leave this to the Commission. It's an important decision. We have to take it ourselves. So, if we make it harder in the governance structure to take decisions, well, we have to live with the consequences of our decisions. But I'm confident it will be used. We just haven't reached the pain level yet, where people will say, well, we really have to use that. But we see threats almost on a daily basis. So if some of the new threats are being put into become reality, maybe we'll come closer to the pain point.
Okay, getting back to Judith. Now let's concentrate a little bit on, as a Bank of Spain board member and as a board member, which is different kind of board, no, not a company, not like most of the people are here, but the board. How do you see these new ideas of being implemented in risk analysis, investment follow-up, strategy? How the boards are adapting to it, and how do you see it also maybe from the window you have in the financial sector or other companies?
So I have the feeling that companies are concentrating more on risk frameworks, a bit less on investment decisions. And I think that in terms of board composition, this is a bit less developed. So, and I think it makes sense because indeed increasing the risk matrix and introducing geopolitical ideas is the lower hanging fruit. So it's the path of least resistance. So to me, this makes sense. But I think that there are also differences depending on the sector, the ownership of the company, and also where the company is based. So depending on the sector, I think that those companies which are more exposed to geopolitical risks, like semiconductor companies, defense companies, energy companies, or technology companies, all in all, probably have a more developed sensitivity towards geopolitical issues. When we think about geographical scope, of course, those coming from the Nordic countries or even Germany probably are also a bit more sensitive towards these kind of issues, and for the good reasons. I mean, they're very much exposed to Russia, and we saw how German dependency on very cheap energy imports from Russia, and also German dependency on China as a foreign market is taking a toll on the German economy. So I think that if we were to think about companies geographically more exposed to geopolitical risks, I think those are the ones from the Nordics and Germany probably, and also from Eastern Europe. And finally, when it comes to the ownership, and you will know this better than myself, Juan, but I think that those companies where the state has a stake are probably also more sensitive towards geopolitical issues. When it comes to investment criteria, I think that this is a very difficult point because there is some kind of a trade-off between economic security and financial optimization. So I think that probably board members and are fighting with this dual approach of seeing how they optimize shareholder value, and at the same time they're creating some kind of redundancy in global value chains. And I think that EU institutions have, and not also national institutions, have a crucial role to play in introducing geopolitical aspects in the agendas of the boards. And for instance, you were asking about financial institutions. So this year we had the traditional stress test conducted on the banks, and in 2026 the single supervisory mechanism, Claudia Buch, already announced that there's going to be a thematic stress test on geopolitical risk, and building on that, probably the ECB will be thinking about what measures to adopt. But indeed, I think that public institutions have a crucial role to play in also making companies aware of geopolitical risks and economic security considerations.
I'm following this conversation, Damien, from the European Commission perspective, and you said also in your first intervention that when you speak with companies, when you talk with companies, you develop the idea of how to promote, protect, and cooperate. No? But how do you see, from the European Commission perspective, what companies should do or are doing or are not doing regarding this matter? No? Their vulnerabilities, strategic materials, technology, risks. I mean, are you trying to get a little bit more insight, no? How companies think and how boards work?
I mean, yes, is the short answer. So one of the slides was risk mitigation and risk analysis or risk assessments. In the framework of those risk assessments, we also try to engage with companies to identify their vulnerabilities. I'm not sure we had been informed of the Nexperia vulnerability. I'm not sure car makers or OEMs told us that they were 100% dependent on cheap chips coming out of China, basically, for example. So the reason why I mention is that it shows that we really need to go a level or two deeper into the granularity of information. And that requires, I think, a trust-building exercise on both sides. So we will continue that and come up with new proposals very soon in what we call the economic security doctrine, early December, because we realize we don't have the setup in place to work well with companies. So, and we don't, intervene in the individual company decisions.
No,
It's
I
for
mean,
the companies to take
I
their
can
own,
mean that. I mean,
their own
how do you
decisions.
see? How do you
But
see
I
it?
think we are, with the communication of June 2023, the Commission passed, I think, a strong signal to the governments and to private companies saying, you need to look at economic security risk much more seriously. And so you really need to elevate this. One way to look at this is indeed in your risk framework, and maybe you work with insurance companies to you can insure yourself for certain risks and get their help also to price the risks. So I think it's a hard question, and I don't have a good answer to your question, I realize, also because it's something we need to develop. You know, the Commission was proposing regulations. It has been the guardian of the treaty, making sure governments of the member states comply with the rules of the treaty that they have committed to. And then we are the referee for a number of things, in particular competition matters, and also anti-dumping. But for the rest, the relationship between the Commission and business has been one where the business is business, as Milton Friedman used to say, and then the Commission is there doing its role more in a laissez-faire approach. Now we are really shifting to a different role where I think we need to, in a way, create a new relationship with companies.
You know that in Esade, EsadeGeo and Esade corporate governance departments, both institutes, as Mario introduced at the beginning, we develop a sort of very basic rule of how to introduce geopolitics in boards and how to start doing this. I mean, we did this 3 years ago, and it seems like ages ago now because things have moved so quickly. Which are the first rule or first idea is, I mean, you have to think geopolitically, basically. I mean, just keep it in mind because we're not doing it. The second one is this is what you have said. In order to do that, companies and boards have to interact more with those actors who play in the geopolitical field, which are governments, which are think tanks, which are universities, which are all sorts of animals, which are not companies itself specifically. And the third is also what Judith said. No, we need to introduce this in a, let's say, orderly way, you know, into risk management and in the different decision-making processes. And it seems like from Madrid, from a state's capital, European capital dimension, that what the European Commission is doing regarding these matters is not still getting filtering through, no?
Sorry, I have to fill in that probably there's also a difference between regulated and non-regulated companies, because in regulated companies, especially supervised companies, the tools of the supervisor are clearer. For instance, I was just mentioning this thematic stress test, geopolitical stress test that will be carried out during this year. So when a company is regulated, public authorities have more tools than when it's more market-based and it belongs to a non-regulated sector.
Well, yes and no. If you take the telecom sector, which is also a regulated sector, there it's regulated for certain reasons. But even the financial sector, where the security risks are not necessarily taken into account. This is why we developed what we call the toolbox for the when we saw the 5G telecom networks being rolled out and very high-risk vendors for the most vulnerable or critical parts in the 5G telecom networks, we issued a recommendation. We worked with member states and developed this toolbox, trying to help governments and regulators to root out equipment from high-risk vendors from one country that we love so much, because it's a vulnerability also for our security. But it really takes so much time.
And views are very different.
The views are so different. So yes, it's easier up to a point. I'm not sure if I can react to 2 points, and I'd like to ask her a question. I'm not sure technology companies are so cognizant of the geopolitics. ASML are one of our most valued companies. Up to 3 years ago, geopolitics was a non-issue. These guys were engineers. selling machines, super high margins. They have a quasi-monopoly, great combination with IMEC in Belgium, little publicity. But so geopolitics was not at all present on the board. So they are really ramping up and investing way more on that. And when you look at throughout the union, no, I mean, it was still very much governed, and with good reasons, by great engineers. The question I want to ask you is, when I looked at, for example, the National Bank of Belgium and the forecast, it's based on assumptions. And assumptions, one of the assumptions were what will be the tariffs for exports. So I'm sure in the Bank of Spain, you had the same conversations on what will be the tariffs on exports of Spain to the United States. You look at the composition of exports and what will be the rate for these, and then you put that into your models. And I'm sure you do the same with China when they block exports of pork meat or jamon. Then it has an impact as well, no? So how do you do that in the bank, if I may ask?
I mean, it was a very tough exercise. I mean, I'm a board member. I'm not in charge of economic forecasting, but of course, the DG of economics reports to the board. And basically, we have been working with scenarios. I mean, it was the only possible way, because we could no longer work with one single scenario. So up until we came to this joint agreement with more certainty, we had to work with scenarios. In any case, the good thing about the Spanish economy is that, at least when it comes to direct exports, it was not so exposed to the US economy as other major economies like Germany and Italy. So also from that point of view, it was a bit reassuring. And if I may react to the point on technology and ASML, I fully agree. But for instance, I also think about EU cloud companies, which are absolutely obsessed about geopolitics, because I think that this will also be part of their business. So basically, if we think about major US cloud companies, we know which three companies, especially two companies we're thinking about. Technologically speaking, they're very much advanced, but having the US Cloud Act, although they have adopted some clear cloud sovereignty frameworks, there are some legal doubts around that. So I think that this is something that cloud companies, EU cloud companies, have very present. And I'd like to mention a very interesting initiative by the European Commission, which was adopted, if I'm not mistaken, on October the 20th, which was a cloud sovereignty framework where for the first time, technological security is defined with 8 different criteria, which have different weights. And building on those weights, you have a seal, which can go from 0, like meaning 0 security, or 4, which is maximum security. So it's the first time that I see that this concept of technological security in the cloud is somehow brought to, it's not so left to interpretation, or it's not so ambiguous. And the European Commission has made an effort to do this. And this cloud sovereignty framework will be the basis for a public tender of 180 million euros. So when you were mentioning Made in Europe before, I don't know if this is somehow part of this initiative.
I don't think so, but indeed it's an interesting initiative worth mentioning, yes. Did the scenarios cover the deal that we finally struck with the US?
I cannot remember.
I
mean, honestly, in terms of tariffs, yes. But in terms of all the other commitments, in terms of purchase of defense equipment, energy, that I think that it's something that we were not thinking of. At least we were mostly thinking about the tariff rate and not so much about those additional commitments. By the way, I understand that those commitments have been based on market trends. So really, yes. I mean,
these are not commitments, these are intentions.
Okay, because I was really surprised to see how South Korea, for instance, took super seriously all the investment intentions or commitments, and they were really negotiating because they thought that would deplete, the way that was framed initially, that would deplete their international reserves. So they came to an agreement to do this not only based on subsidies, but on loans. And also they were advocating very much to have an agreement between the Federal Reserve and their central bank. So I tend to think, but maybe it's my interpretation, that these kind of commitments were taken very seriously by Japan and South Korea. And in the case of the EU, it's more intentions.
It's from rules to deals, and every deal is different.
Every deal is different, okay.
And I don't know the details of what the Koreans are negotiating.
But last year at the EMEAM, more or less at this time of the year, we were discussing, well, not a few weeks before,
a few weeks before, yes.
Yeah, we were discussing what could happen if Trump would have won the elections. And there was, and the European Commission was telling us, we have a plan, no? In case he wins. Also with these scenarios.
We had scenarios, yes.
Yeah? So how did that plan work?
I'm not at liberty to answer. It was a very confidential project. Yes.
So it was like that. Oh, yeah, it happened. I mean,
we were ready.
Because there was a lot of talk about this plan.
Yeah.
And a different scenario. But then once he won, we forgot we had a plan, no? And then things have just been happening, no? And maybe in the future, when you can unveil these documents, it could be also interesting to see what were the forecasts and what.
In 50 years, we will release it.
50, still longer with the Spanish legislation, or those kind of things. Okay, we've spoken about tariffs, trade, no? Also, and its relation with economic security, US and all these plans and scenarios and the agreement. But I think we have time to maybe talk more from a broader perspective, which is also economic security, which is growth, which is what's going to happen with the European Union. We've spoken a little bit about industrial policy, which is now a fashionable thing. It wasn't, at least in the times I went to university, nobody wanted to do that. But the specialty even it disappeared as an offer in those times. But now we have all this discussion about the Draghi and the Letta reports. You mentioned the new budget, which has not been really very well received here in Esade. We are presenting a paper about it in next week that with a seminar we did last month. How do you see you being in the economic security area? How do you see this other dimension, which is so important for European Union?
Yeah, I mean, it's essential. It's indeed not my field of work and expertise.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back to 2019, when President von der Leyen presented her political program, what we call political guidelines, it was a dual transition, right? The green economy and the digital transition.
Mm-hmm.
There was almost no word of growth. Growth was taken for granted. It would happen. You didn't have to do anything. It would come. Well, so now the discourse has completely changed. Now we realize we really need to work on this in a smart way, and we have the tools to do it. But as Judith said, it's economic policy, industrial policy is a shared competence, both shared between EU institutions and the national governments. And I think we need to do that in a smart way. I'm personally very glad that the German government has relaxed these debt rules they had imposed on themselves for many years, which from a macroeconomic perspective were interesting. I'm a good Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And they had imposed on everybody. There was a treaty signed by 27 member states that all the member states would comply with the golden rule. Luckily, we forgot about that. So I think we need to be smart in our economic policy. And you're right, you can only protect what is of value, and what is of value is not rigid. You need to make sure our companies keep growing and that we're doing what we can. So when we lose market opportunities in the US because of the tariffs, that's why we do our trade policy. That's why we want to do new free trade agreements. And hopefully we will ratify the Mercosur agreement finally. It's been 6 years in the making. And that's why we want to do deals with India and other things. So we want to contribute if you want. We realize it's not a short-term solution. Trade policy is about opening markets and opening your own markets to goods from outside. So that's a challenge, but also it increases your competitiveness. And I think the ministers of finance have a strong responsibility. You need to think also for the EU budget, where do you put your money and you remember the accelerator principle? You have to look at the accelerator value of money you invest in this sector versus that sector versus that sector, I think we need to be a little bit smarter. Mm-hmm. But we have the tools. I think I hope I sense a message also of optimism that we can still do this very much. We are in much better position than Switzerland or the UK or some other countries in Europe. Much better. We have a much stronger market and we are a stronger player and more stability. So I think we are in a better place. We have the tools. We just need to also shift our mindset. Maybe one message I also wanted to pass is as all the governments increase the military budget, we have to increase the budget on economic security. When I see the resources that are in economic security, on research security, on the protect side for foreign investment, for export controls, and other tools, we need to invest more human resources. We can't continue business as usual in this field. So we should, a little bit of the money that goes to defend, I think should go to economic security as well. We should not forget that.
If I may, I'm going to make a bold statement because basically up until now, and even now, many economists tend to think that there's some kind of a trade-off between competitiveness and economic security. And to me, both are self-reinforcing ideas. And let me elaborate a bit on this. So basically, when we think about demographic projections going forward, they are not very positive. So basically, this means that economic growth will depend on productivity gains. And productivity gains will mainly depend on technology and adoption of massive adoption of new technologies by companies. But for these productivity gains to take place, for companies to really adopt new technologies, there needs to be economic security. Otherwise, companies will simply not adopt these technologies. And I'm thinking, for instance, about cloud. Many companies and even public institutions are very much hesitant to move to the cloud simply because they have some doubts about data sovereignty, about vendor lock-in, about simply whether they're not going to be trapped in there. So I think that these concepts should go hand in hand together, and there won't be competitiveness without economic security and the other way around. And regarding economic prospects, I'm rather positive about the German economy because I think that they have a stable government, they have a plan, investing 500 billion euros in the coming 10 years to develop their public infrastructure, which was long needed. So indeed, they have also challenges when it comes to shifting of their industrial base, but I think that they have the fiscal space to do this and they have the plan. I'm a bit more worried about France, especially for fiscal reasons and also for a bit of a political instability. So if I had to choose among the two, the largest economies, which one I'm more worried about at this point in time, it would be France and not so much Germany, which I'm rather positive about Germany in the medium term.
I won't comment, sometimes I'm asked, oh, what about this member state and that member state? And I answer, I'm a father of 3 children. So I say, I love my 3 children.
Okay, thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Buenos días.
Thank you.